Let's talk about how to think about basic spectacle. So, most indie games don't have enough spectacle. And I know not every game needs spectacle, but if we're on an adventure, we need to be sold on the adventure. You need to show the player something cool. And I think the reason indie games skimp on that is because it takes a lot of effort to put together something cool. So they don't really know exactly where they're going with it. They don't know exactly how to organize it, and they kind of get nervous and back down. And that means that like 90% of their cutscenes are two people talking over a grainy GIF. And it's like, look at that volcano exploding back there in the background. Yep, sure is a volcano exploding. Think we're going to feel any impact from that? Probably not. That's not spectacular enough. So let's talk about how to set up some spectacle that will have more punch, be more reliable, and be cheaper. So the first thing we're going to want to talk about is the most expensive kind of spectacle, making spectacular gameplay. And by this, I don't mean good gameplay. I mean gameplay that has spectacle in it. So Mass Effect is a good example of this. Their gameplay has never been very good, really, but it's always been spectacular. You're always fighting against giant monsters. Things are moving. Cool stuff is happening. Even if there's no fighting going on, you're looking at a giant space station or an alien world. Your friends are hooting and hollering. It's a great time. It's spectacular. But this costs money. A lot of money. You got to have like 1 million art assets, and they've all got to be good. So let's assume you can't do that. Let's assume you're a normal indie with a normal indie budget and talk about how to put in spectacle more affordably, and that means cutscenes. Cutscenes are the bread and butter of spectacle in cheap indie games, and they're very easy to put together once you understand. And by easy, I don't mean in terms of the effort it takes to build the art assets. I mean in terms of planning it out. What should they do? Well, I'll give you a way to think about it. Let's talk about reducing the price. In order to reduce the price on any sort of spectacle cutscene, you're going to want to think in terms of a set piece. For example, the train is out of control. It's barreling towards this broken bridge. Oh no, what are we going to do? And the whole level is built around this train, this out of control train. And then the train goes off the edge. Oh no. So the reason why thinking in terms of set pieces is so valuable is because you're already thinking in terms of set pieces. Your levels almost certainly are organized around set pieces, and therefore reusing them to do spectacle cutscenes is an obvious choice. So just doing it on purpose is the point here. If we put together a level where the whole conceit is that it's a runaway train, then our spectacle should all be based around the fact that it's a runaway train, because we already have most of the art assets for that, and we've already got all of the traction we need. The player is in there, seeing the runaway train. Using those same art assets, we can then convince the player that this is a spectacular place to be. We can introduce it with a spectacular cutscene where, some bandits kill the operator and he falls over on a lever and suddenly the train starts accelerating. And we can end it with a cutscene where it flies off the bridge and explodes violently, and then we see the player hanging onto a rope or whatever. And then in the middle, we can show cutscenes to amp it up. The train goes past a curve, screeching because it's going way too fast, and we hear that woof sound every time one of the cars goes by. You know what I mean? Woof, 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 woof. Spectacular. Once we understand that we're going to be using these specific assets, reusing them with minimal changes, we can start to plan out what sort of scenes we can manage with the pieces, the assets we've got. Now, I say set piece, but it doesn't have to be a set piece. It could be a dragon. It could be anything you want. But it does have to be unique. And this is something that a lot of indie devs get wrong. They'll try and put together a spectacle about something pretty normal. Like, oh, look, this village just got burned down. But if there's 100 villages in the game, it's not going to have the level of impact you want. You've got to add something that's unique. So in those sorts of cases, I generally think in terms of a lens. We've got to have some kind of lens on this village that makes this village particularly unique so that the player will remember this particular village as having this particular fate, rather than just being generic village 42-6 was burned down by generic villain. It's got to have something a little bit more than that. And therefore, we need to come up with something unique about this village in specific. Maybe it's a foggy village, and you don't have any other foggy villages in the game. Maybe it's on top of a mountain, and you don't have any other mountaintop villages in the game. It doesn't have to be very unique. It could be something like, oh, it's on the edge of a river, and there's no other villages where we point out the fact that it's on the edge of a river. Whatever unique lens we come up with is something that we can use to set up our spectacle specifically. If it's fog, then we have an intro sequence with fog, and we have an exit sequence with fog, where maybe the villagers at the end, when the whole village is in danger, there's a stomping sound and the shouting of a horde of villagers with pitchforks and torches, and you just see them in the fog. Shadows with, black shadows with bright points of light above their head where the torches are burning, stomping forward out of the fog. That's spectacle. The key here is you don't have to hyperfixate on it. You need it for the spectacle, but for the rest of the game, when the player is actually wandering around the village, you don't have to keep hammering it home. It just has to be present enough that the player knows that that's what this village, that's the attach point they've got for this village. You don't have to have everybody in the village obsess over the fact that it's a foggy village. It just has to be something the player can grip with, can understand that that is what makes this village distinct from other villages. Once you've got that lens going, or that unique set piece going, it's pretty simple to start planning out the visuals you can achieve with that. But what are you doing with them? And this is the other half of planning out a cutscene, right? It's got to have a point. If you just show a mountain or a foggy village, it's not going to connect very well with the player. We've got to find some way to make it matter. So there are three of the most fundamental ways to do that. Now, obviously, these are not like universal. This is not the full list of everything that a cutscene could ever do. These are just three super basic, super reliable methods that you can use until you're really comfortable with exploring the space a little bit more complexly. Firstly, and most obviously, is world building. And I think that a lot of people use world building as their only touchstone. So world building is when you have some concepts that the player doesn't yet know are important, and you want to show them that those concepts are what this game is about. For example, in Star Wars, how does it open? Giant fucking ship, a space battle with another spaceship. We immediately know that that's what this sort of setting is about, and we don't know who's on board. We don't know what's going on, but we know that that's the point of the setting. But the thing about that is, it's only good for introducing those concepts. If you're still just showing stuff in the late game, the player already knows. If there's no stakes, if there's no interest, it's not really very spectacular. So world building is something that can only be used occasionally when you have to introduce a new concept or pump up a concept to center stage. It's not something you should rely on for your meat, for your bread and butter. It's something it's like hors d'oeuvres. It's a starter salad. So you got to think of it like that and not overuse it. The second thing you can do is put in a PC connection. Just show the player characters in that setting. And almost always, this is going to be an underdog situation. The players are shown to be inside of the spectacle and usually being overwhelmed by it. They're struggling with it. They're fighting, but they're not getting very far. For example, if the train is going off the cliff, then the players would be getting, rattled and thrown off their feet by the sudden motions of the train, and they'd be swinging off the edge of the train, going ah, and then grabbing a hold and climbing back up, that sort of thing. It makes the player feel like the player is on an adventure. The player characters are there doing adventurous things, and the player is, by proxy, also there. This is not always how you put it together. For example, if you're putting together a cool hotshot character like One Punch Man or Bayonetta, they might not be in an underdog situation very much, but they'll still do things like get lost or distracted. So by putting the player character into these roles inside of the spectacle, you can really sell the spectacle because you can really show off how the player characters relate to it. This is how you can make a mountain into spectacle. Like, oh, here's a picture of a mountain. How is that spectacle? Little teeny player characters. Yep. And we've been using that since the beginning. Final Fantasy I did that. So this is something that's very reliable. And even if you choose not to make them the underdog, if you do it on purpose, if you do it purposefully to help build the connection, it will still build that connection. And it will make the spectacle connect. Of course, the third decent option is villains. And normally speaking, the villain is going to end up either dominating or dying. So when Darth Vader comes onto the scene in the first scene he's in, he doesn't fight. He doesn't participate. He's not struggling. He's in complete control. Because that's the point. He's dominating this situation. He's created it. And what is the player character of the movie doing? She's getting dominated. She's struggling, but she can't escape. She can't even resist. All she can do is spit in his face. This is the very, very most standardized approach, and it is very hard to go wrong with this approach, so it's worth doing. If the villain is shown involved in a spectacle, they should either be dominating it or they should be dying, because a dying villain is always great, right? So that's why these three approaches are the standard, and the PC as underdog and the villains dominating and dying, just super standard. And if you're not quite sure what you want to do these. Like, the train is going off the edge. What are we going to do? Well, we'll show the players struggling to get off, and then the villain is going to try and grab the player. He's not going to have too hard of a time with it because he's the villain. And then at the last second, he'll fall an inch short, and then the train goes down and explodes, and he's falling into the fire. Spectacle. Great stuff, right? It's a foggy village. The players are lost in the fog. Oh, no, there's a random person right here. We were 2 feet away from him. We didn't even see him. Woof. Oh, no. Surprise. Very basic stuff, right? The villain is in the fog. The villain stalks through it, not a care in the world. Totally at home in the fog. Until in the final cutscene when the villain is dying, he's dying in the fog. He says, help me, help me. And someone goes, is someone out there? Hello? Help, help. And then the voice gets further away. Hello? Someone? Did I hear you? Don't walk away. And very faintly. Hello? I must have been hearing something. Spectacle. So I just wanted to sort of lay these out there. This is not like the foundational truths of cutscenes. I just wanted to get your brain going so that when you're trying to think about how to put spectacle in your game, this is a super standard setup. This is how you can do it reliably. And it has a super reliable payoff because showing the player the cool adventure they're on will always make the player happy. So try it. See you around.